Traders, how are you? With Marcello. We're in Miami today. There were a few bottles that were drinking. So we're going to start with the recap of what happened in the market slides. Let me throw out the Chile hat. A lot of news this week. Chile is starting to intervene in their exchange rate process. Remember, Chile is the only first world country in Latin America. We have New York City sending out a PSA, a public service announcement. If a nuclear attack hits the city, what you should do. And we even have absolutely atrocious numbers when it comes to the economy. Let's go ahead and get started. So overall for the week, the markets were down. The biggest overall news item of the week was the situation with the inflation. The inflation now has reached 9.1%, which is the highest going back decades. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's 40 years. I'll look at the number here exactly. I have it in my notes. Keep in mind, I want you to remember something, that the number that the government gives out now for the inflation isn't the actual number, first of all. It's not even the number that they used when we had the highest inflation in history, which was in the 1980s, where they changed the numbers in the 1990s. So if we were to use the same methodology that they used before, the actual inflation rate that the government would report right now would be at about 19%. But I'm sure most of you, when you go to the grocery store, even with gas prices that have doubled, gas prices have essentially gone up, 150%, right? Before, when you were able to tank up your car with $30, now it costs about 90 or 100, right? The inflation rate is not only 20, 30%. So I think all of us know that, right? Because the money just doesn't go as far anymore when it comes to the supermarket. Markets in the United States overall generally negative. The markets in in Europe mostly negative as well. We got Russia went down over 5%. Latin America generally lower as well. Africa and the Middle East mixed, with South Africa taking the biggest loser at 4.97%. And then in the far east we have Asia and Australia, mostly mixed, with the Hong Kong index, which is the Hang Seng, going down over 7%. They're going through another round of lockdowns when it comes to the pandemic. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news. In the irony of what's happening in the crypto winter, the founders of Three Arrows Capital have officially disappeared. Remember that this company is going bankrupt, and now the lawyers from 3AC, which is Three Arrows Capital, said that they don't know the location of the founders to be able to go ahead and start the liquidation and try to recover some of the customer funds. Celsius, which is the other broker, they're one of the largest crypto lending financial entities in the crypto space. They're in bankruptcy as well. They had over $8 billion in loans, near $12 billion in assets under management as of May. And supposedly they reported as of June that they had 1.7 million customers. One of the things that's really interesting with these crypto companies is whenever a company goes into bankruptcy, they have the option to select what kind of bankruptcy they're going to choose. So a company could theoretically choose what's called a SIPA or SIPA bankruptcy, where the customers essentially come first. So the money that's liquidated from these companies goes back to the customers first. Well, these companies didn't do that. They chose literally to file the bankruptcy where the company essentially owns all of the user assets. And this is what I've always said to you guys in the beginning, where this happens to regular companies in normal course of business, right? But at least with normal course of business or businesses in the space, you normally have a bit of a defense or a bit of a wall, right? You have these regulations and the companies and the states and all that kind of stuff, right? With a lot of these companies, when it comes to crypto, there is no regulation. There's none. So if there is a situation where you lose all your money, or Coinbase, if you guys remember, which is the largest crypto brokerage in the United States, they changed their terms and conditions to state that if they do go to bankruptcy, that the assets of the people that have accounts at Coinbase, it's literally Coinbase's assets now. You literally don't own it. So you could lose all your money essentially. This is what I always told you guys when it comes to crypto. It's not that you can't make money. Obviously, it's going to go up. It's going to go down. I have no doubt in my mind that it's going to go to $1 billion. What everybody always said it was going to go to and make record highs. But there's also, with that higher risk comes obviously the situation where, we have had exchanges in Canada, for example, where somebody has lost hundreds of millions of dollars and they just disappear. There's no way to get your money back. So just be careful. Don't put all your money into crypto because you want to have a little bit of protection, okay? The Bank of International Settlements, which you don't know, it's kind of like the central bank of central banks. They released a survey stating that 81 central banks around the world have been accelerating plans to release their own cryptocurrencies. There are a lot of excuses that have been given, including the pandemic, but a lot of these central banks have already had this en route before the pandemic, and this is what I always thought was going to happen from the beginning, where we essentially are going to have government coins, and that's going to be the end of privacy because they could just decide, well, you've had too much pizza today, Marcello. Here comes Conspiracy Marcello. You have had too much hamburgers today, so you are not allowed to go and buy more hamburgers. How you like the hat? Thought it was hilarious. I bought it at Ross. All right, moving on. Back to being serious. Conspiracy Marcello's back in the corner. Celsius and Voyager. I mentioned about the bankruptcy where they opted to have the company own all the user assets. As of Saturday morning, we did have a bit of a rise this week in Bitcoin. I forgot to write the percentage, but it got to 20,726. In commodities, this isn't really commodities, but I thought this was actually very unusual that we've had a lot of prime ministers that are resigning around the world. I'll give you a list here. Conspiracy Marcello is back. Italy's Draghi, the prime minister, is out. UK Boris Johnson has resigned. Abe Inzo, I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize. From Japan, he was unfortunately murdered. The Prime Minister from Estonia has resigned. Estonia is in Eastern Europe, Northeastern Europe. The Irish government has had a no confidence vote. And we have Dutch protests continuing to gain steam where German farmers are starting to join. If you guys remember, they were blockading highways with their tractors. They were putting animal excrements at the offices of the government employees. And remember that the Netherlands is literally the second largest exporter of food in the world. And the law that they're trying to pass in the Netherlands, back to Conspiracy Marcello, they're literally trying to shut down essentially 30% of the production of the food to, quote unquote, save the environment. So whether you think it's saving the environment or not is relative, but, remember what I always mentioned to you guys about the world food problem and the shortages that we're going to have. Literally the second largest exporter of food in the world, the government is trying to shut down. Whether it's right or wrong is besides the point, but they're trying to shut down 30% of the production of the second largest food exporter in the world. So if the preppers were right, prepare accordingly. We'll call Conspiracy Marcello back here in a moment. Europe is fearing the suspension of deliveries of their gas, which is going to derail their preparation for the winter. We have a situation where Germany is going to there's some cities that are creating hot spaces. France is also shutting down. Macron stated that he was going to turn off the public lights to be able to go ahead and save on energy. That's how bad things are getting there in Europe. Argentina, in 2022, 2023, wheat production is estimated to be lower and went from 800,000 metric tons to 17.7 due to the drought that they're having there. So it's not just the US, it's not just Europe. You can see Argentina, which is quite a considerable production of grain, which is something that we need, for example, to be able to grow food. It's not like fertilizer, but they feed the grain to animals and things of that nature. We also have New York City Emergency Management preparing a PSA, and they sent a video to everyone essentially saying important steps for New Yorkers to follow if a nuclear attack occurs.
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit. Okay.
Now, Conspiracy Marcello's back. Why would they be doing that now? I don't believe in coincidences, right? So why all of a sudden would they be announcing that now? Why not when the war started with Ukraine? Why not? Right? So I think the preppers were right, guys. Copper, which is an industrial metal, is the reference for a lot of other industrial metals. The price has collapsed under 17,500 a ton, 29% down from the 2020 high. Iron ore is down 33% from its highs this year. Aluminum also is down 40% as well. What does this mean? It means that a lot there's a lot less demand for these industrial metals, especially copper, which is kind of like the referral, right? A lot of the plumbing in a lot of our houses, for example, are copper. There's coppers in cars, there and all kinds of things. But if people have a lot less demand for these industrial metals, what does that tell you about the economy? There's less people that are ordering these things, which means that they're falling in price. There's also another situation where the dollar is currently at a 20-year high. That's affecting as well. But obviously, we don't have very good news about what the economy is doing, which means that a lot of these metals are going to go down probably even further. Gas demand destruction through July 8th has gone down by 9.7%. Remember that the consumer in most of the industrialized economies around the world, that means essentially every economy around the world except most of Africa and some of the countries in Asia, the biggest percentage of any economy is consumer spending. So if we have fear in the market where people are afraid to spend money because they're a little bit fearful of their job, Google, for example, which is the third largest company in the world, said that they're going to slow down their hiring. If you remember last week, I talked about Amazon, which is another one of the biggest countries in the world. One of the other biggest companies in the world. It was the bottle talking. So Amazon also said that they're going to stop their expansion plans. They're going to stop being as aggressive. So we're starting to get all of these news items and blips that we don't really have a good situation economically. The consumer's not going to spend as much money, which in the US, for example, is almost 70% of the economy, 70. And then we're just in a downward spiral until we eventually get out of it. Precious metals definitely lower, mainly due to the dollar being at 20-year highs. Gold is down 1.98% to $1,709. Silver is down over 3%, $18.83. Some of you guys asked me where I buy my gold and silver. Again, I'm not recommending that you do it. I'm not a trading advisor or an accountant or a legal advisor. But if you want to look at the prices now, they seem very attractive to me. And some of you guys in the comments has asked me where I buy my gold and silver. There's some I get from the country of Colombia, which turns out to be a little bit cheaper, but you can go to sdbullion.com, jmbullion.com, and also apmex.com. All of those, look for the deals. They got some really good deals sometimes. I didn't report the discovery in Uganda where they reportedly found 320,000 tons of refined gold, and that would put it at an astronomical number. And there are a lot of people that are skeptical due to the fact that, and I have my notes here, the 2022 estimates from the World Gold Council have reported that just above 205,000 tons of gold has been mined since the beginning of history. 205,000. We'll just cap it off. It's a little bit more. We'll cap it off there. And then 53,000 tons have been found and verified in underground reserves. So that would put it at 258,000 tons have either been verified in underground reserves or mined since the beginning of history. And supposedly, Uganda now has found 320,000 tons of gold. So more than what we ever have mined in history and more than what we have verified in underground reserves. Just be careful what you guys are listening to out there in the news. Financial and banking news. The housing crisis is beginning to accelerate. The sales of new homes fell 31% in June compared to last year. And I thought this was really unusual with respect to the collapse, let's say, of the American economy and our way of life. Democrats have stated that they want $650 billion in IMF aid for the Ukraine war relief in the form of SDRs. If you guys didn't know, and most people don't know this, the International Monetary Fund essentially has its own money. It's called special drawing rights, or SDRs. So representatives from our country, where we use dollars in the United States, is stating that a foreign entity should send aid from us in their foreign currency. When in 1970s, 1960s, 1950s, 1980s, you should send them some dollars. And so we have a situation where we're beginning to have a fracture in leadership when it comes to the United States. And the last 16 times that there's been a change from one empire to the next or one monetary system to the next, 13 of those 6 times we've had war. So the preppers were right. PPI, which is the Producer Price Index, went up 11.3% year over year. So just to kind of connect all the dots, because I know a lot of you guys like it when I do this, the inflation that was reported by the United States is 9.1%. The price producer index is the price at which it costs to create a service or create a product. So at the creator level, we're at 11.3% increase. And that still has to come to us to be able to buy. It has to go through shipping. It has to go through, work and packaging and all kinds of things. So if it costs 11.3% to produce an item or a service and the current inflation is 9.1%, then the most likely scenario is that we're still going to have a little bit of an increase in the inflation rate. Not to account for the fact that, remember that I told you guys in the beginning, I think of this video, I can't remember because I'm a little bit inebriated, but if they were calculating the inflation rate the same rate as they were doing in the 1980s, for example, the actual inflation rate reported by the government would be 18 or 19% roughly. So just keep that in mind. The Fed has maintained, the central bank in the United States has maintained a broad dollar index, which is currency weighted by trade volume with the United States. And it's also inflation adjusted version called the broad dollar index. It's called the real broad dollar index. And according to that index, which goes back to 2006, by the end of June, the dollar has spiked by the most since the beginning of the index. So the dollar literally is just exploding in value right now. And I think this is what's called a bull trap, which is essentially where it's a trap like a bull. No, just kidding. It's a trap where the value just explodes to the upside, but it's not going to stay there. The more likely scenario is that it's going to explode right back to the downside after it explodes. The EU, the European Union, has frozen $13.87 billion of assets belonging to Russian oligarchs and other sanctioned officials from Russia. Chinese production inflation rose 6.1%, which is, I would say, a more important number, the China number, than the US number, because remember that China literally manufactures everything for the world. The euro is down 12%. If you ever wanted to go on vacation to Europe, now would be the time, considering that now the dollar is stronger than the euro. It's reached parity, and now the dollar has gone essentially $1 is worth more than €1, which is the first time that it's happened in 20 years. Bank of Korea, Bank of New Zealand, Bank of Canada, and Bank of the Philippines have all decided to raise their interest rates for their central banks. Remember that part of the reason why we're seeing this downturn is due to the fact that after the crisis in 2008 and 2009, governments around the world decided to just print money left and right and bring the interest rates down to zero. That creates essentially a bubble effect because we rely on these interest rates to start businesses and buy homes and buy cars. And obviously all that is consumer spending, which in the United States, remember, is almost 70% of the economy. So now that a lot of the countries are pulling back on that spending, they're increasing the interest rates. That makes things a lot more expensive for us to go out and do business, to start businesses and buy cars and buy houses, among other things. And that's why we're seeing this big downturn now globally. U.S. producer prices increased by more than expected in June. I mentioned this. It was 11.3%. The average apartment rent in Manhattan is at a record high at $4,050. The average high-end units topped $5,000 for the first time as well. I know I have some properties in Tampa. The rents went from $1,250 to $2,000 in a span of 2 years, and they're continuing to climb. The properties are right. What's worse is not the fact that inflation is exploding, but it's that the actual wages are going down. So at the same time where inflation is going up, you're not making, if the inflation rate right now, for example, that was reported is 9.1%, has your salary gone up by 9.1% from 1 year to the next? Has your salary gone up by 5% or 10%? So what's happening is the purchasing power of the consumer, which again is the most important number for most economies around the world, has been going down for the last 15 months. So it's literally a double whammy, and that's why we're having a lot of these problems and why, the preppers are right and things are going to get worse. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt are planning to join the BRICS, to join their membership and apply to join the group. BRICS is a group which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and also South Africa. which years ago were a group of the next kind of generation of super economies. South Africa isn't really doing that well anymore, but the other countries are. And this is a little bit worrisome because it's changing the U.S. homogeny around the world, where people just aren't listening to the U.S. anymore, essentially. And that's not a good thing. It's a good thing for other people around the world, but it's not a good thing for us Americans because it's going to bring down our standard of living by quite a bit. The new job openings drop in 47 states. Nationally, it's down by 17%. At the moment, there are 2 jobs available for every person looking for a job, and there's still an extremely high number of jobs available around the United States. In political news, Sri Lanka president fled to the Maldives after their protests. This is another thing that's starting to happen as well. In addition to all the prime ministers resigning, we have Sri Lanka, where they literally took over the presidential palace. They were taking selfies and threw a party at the pool of the presidential palace. We have serious protests now in Panama, which is a little bit close to home. And we even have them spreading to a country of Laos, which is in Southeast Asia. And so these are the things that I mentioned to you guys when I started talking about the food shortages and these things, where I think the next 10 years we're going to have not only economic and social problems, but we're going to have environmental problems as well. Chile approved, this I thought was really weird as well. Chile approves a law to protect employment rights for mutants and genetically modified humans. Are you guys like doing surgeries that, I should know about? Because isn't that weird? You don't think that's weird? Economic news. Number of Americans filing for new unemployment claims went up. It went up for the second straight week. There still have been over 11 million jobs available for quite a few months now. Corporate news, Chase shares went down by over 2%, considering the fact that their profit fell just a little bit from about $2 billion or so from a year ago. And Taiwan's giant chip maker TSMC, which is the semiconductor. If you guys don't know, the semiconductor are the chips that go in absolutely everything, because everything are electronics nowadays with computers. Their net profit went up 76.4% in quarter 2. In trade news, a Ukraine representative on Wednesday said that there may be a deal to allow the grain exports that were blocked by Russia to continue through the Black Sea. There was 4-way talks that began in Turkey, and hopefully there's over 20 million tons that are still stuck, which could hopefully ease a little bit of the food problem that we're going to have here shortly. Shares of Twitter plunged over 11% after Elon Musk decided that he's pulling out. Remember, the memes were glorious. He had a pair of twins with one of his executives at Neuralink while he was still with his previous girlfriend as well. And in technology, researchers at a Hong Kong university discover an enzyme that may help obese people feel full and stop eating. So now you could just take an enzyme instead of telling yourself to stop being a fat ass. No offense. In investment news, ERCOT, which is, there's 3, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if you guys are electrical engineers, but if I'm not mistaken, there are 3 different electrical grids in the United States. We have the West Coast, the East Coast, and then Texas, being Texas, they have their own electrical grid. They are warning that they've had to shut down 6 power generation facilities due to the fact that they have a high demand for power amid a heat wave. So you can see that things are starting to heat up quite a bit, and we're even having problems with power now. Investment news, the Heathrow Airport, which is the busiest airport in the United Kingdom, one of the busiest in the world, has decided to cap their daily passengers at 100,000 passengers per day. They used to have, before the pandemic, 110 to 125,000, but they have, problems with queues, baggage delays, and cancellations. So we've had a lot of cancellations in the United States as well, so just keep that in mind if you're going to be traveling. And U.S. home buyers are canceling deals at the highest rate since the pandemic due to the fact that we have surging mortgage rates in addition to inflation. That's the news for this week, guys. Remember, the preppers were right. I'm going to go enjoy the playa, as they say here in Miami. You guys have a great one. We'll see you next week.